Hi everyone, I'm Jeymarie Guerra, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. I'm also a registered play therapist. And today we're going to be talking about screen time, and I'm going to let her do the honor of introducing herself. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Angelica Robles. I am a developmental behavioral pediatrician. So that means I'm a pediatrician that specializes in seeing kids with developmental differences, ADHD, autism, with evaluations and just follow up care. And so thank you for having me again, and I look forward to our talk.
Today, we're going to focus on screen time and the effects that it does have on our kids, specifically our neurodivergent population, but also just in general. I think screen time is one of those things that sometimes it's like the elephant in the room. It has to be addressed, but no one wants to talk about it.
So true. Yeah.
So I'm gonna go through 5 questions, and we'll have a conversation based on each specific question point. So the first question is, what are the recommended guidelines for screen time based on a child's developmental stage?
Yeah, so good question. And I know these are like recommendations. And so I just want to start off by saying these are recommended things, but everyone is going to have some days where things are going to fluctuate because that's just life. And I think it also matters in the quality of the media that we expose our kids to. So, for the ages specifically, though, so for ages younger than 18 months old, we probably don't really want to use screen time just because their brains are so young. They don't really know how to process the information. But things that you might want to do is screen time or FaceTime with a family member or a friend and have like some conversation so that there's that social engagement and interaction and that you're doing that with them as well. If they're from about 18 to 24 months, you might want to have a little more time using a screen, but you want to choose content that is like high educational content, I should say, where you still want to also sit with the child where they're not too far and using it by themselves, and you want to engage with them from 2 to 5 years old. That's where they could have a little bit more independence, again, still with the high quality educational content, maybe about an hour a day. And then from 5 and up, you kind of want to make a individual plan as a family and how much screen time you want to use and how you're using it. Again, really looking at what are those sources we're looking at, what are we getting from this, and are they safe?
Thank you for answering. And as you were talking and as I asked you the question, I realized that maybe some people may not necessarily know what would fall under screen time. So can we clarify a little bit as to what pediatricians consider screen time?
Yeah, so screen time is essentially anything with a screen. So that's TV, the computer, an iPad or tablet, a phone. So that, when you think about it, is that's a lot of different things that we come in contact with, even like as adults, like so much is on a screen these days. The kids that are 5 and up specifically, how do you talk to parents about making a plan, or what do you recommend for those age groups?
Right. So there are age groups that tend to crave more independence, crave more choices. I want to watch this or I want to do this. I don't want to play. Um and in general, just kids that require a little bit more redirections, and sometimes parents go to is screen time so that they can redirect the child to do something while they can complete whatever task they need to complete at the time. My recommendation is the same, limit as much screen time as possible, just because symbolic play is so important in a child's development, their ability to play more, whether it's outside, if your child can't go outside, engage in those imaginary play indoors with items can really help a child nervous system regulate, process what they went through at school, daycare, whatever childcare they're going to. and problem solve. So if they get some form of resolution for something that maybe throughout the day they weren't able to get resolved internally. So playtime is really, really important, especially for that population, just because of where the brain is and it's still firing and it's still trying to make the right connections towards puberty. So hopefully I answered the
Yeah,
question.
definitely.
So, my question next would be, how does excessive screen time impact a child's development, particularly in areas like social skills and cognitive abilities?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And there was actually a study that came out last year in JAMA Pediatrics that said 1-year-old children, I know they're young, but they noticed that developmentally at that age with exposure to screen time, they were behind in their development compared to typical same age peers in different areas. And that included cognitive skills, language skills, fine motor, I believe social as well. And so I think what you want to gather from a study like that is, not again that we have to be super strict, like no screen time at all, but again, and how we use it. So I think that's why there's a recommendation in saying, okay, if you're especially with the younger kids in this age group, like 18 months or younger, or 18 to 24, when the brain is really growing quickly all the way up to 5 years old, you really want to make sure you're engaging with the child because they could learn some language from some of those educational programs. We also want to sit with them and ask a question as they're doing it, or kind of like sing along with them and make it fun and something that you're doing together. I know you can't do that every single moment, but to kind of know what they're listening to, so maybe even later you can kind of touch on some of those skills from that show and ask them about it. So um, it can affect kids, I think, again, if we just kind of let them sit and do their own thing, or if we don't really know what kind of content they're looking at that may not be as educational or helpful for them to learn those skills.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, from the mental health field, we noticed that kids who unfortunately engage in too much screen time will start to mimic traits of ADHD, autism, conduct disorders, poor regulation, low frustration tolerance, anxiety. So it does affect a child just because the child's brain isn't able to handle
Mhm.
everything they're watching on TV. Even if it's the most purest child show, the brain is just not able to tolerate everything that needs to happen
Mhm.
while it's watching any form of, screen time.
Yeah, yeah. And I know there were some recommendations, like if you're watching something, let's say for 30 minutes or an hour, that it's also something that is continuous. Like it's not just like these short videos that last
Mhm.
a minute or whatever, that they have a storyline that they can follow. So it's not as broken up. And so it kind of helps with keep them keeping attention to something for a while too.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think a lot of parents are seeing the effects of, mental health
Mhm.
challenges or issues on their children that some of us didn't, or our population, I'm a millennial, we didn't suffer as much because we didn't have screen time as much. There
Right,
were no cell phones.
right,
You go outside, you play, the lights come out, you come inside, stranger danger, you stay in a pack,
right,
and
right.
so forth.
Yeah. And I
Uh,
think another area I haven't touched on yet is how it impacts sleep too. So
yes.
that is one thing that we do want to be a little more stringent on, is like when we turn off all of those screens. So the recommendation is about an hour before bedtime. We want to cut off all devices that have that screen because of that blue light in those devices. It decreases our body's natural melatonin levels. And so it makes it harder for anyone, or especially a child, to fall asleep after that. It wakes them up again. It throws off their cycle. So just keep that in mind. I think that's really important because then, as you know, without good sleep, then, like you said, you're going to have more of these mental health concerns or symptoms of ADHD and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big one. And I know I use the filters on my phone, um, just so I am not as impacted. And I'm an adult, so I can't even imagine a kid.
Yeah.
Um, so are there specific types of content or interactive activities on screens that are more beneficial for a child's development?
Yeah, so I think I kind of touched a little bit on that before in terms of like, especially for the younger kids that are younger than 18 months, that's where you FaceTime or do video chats. Just because, again, you're working more on the language and the social skills that way. For the older kids, again, I think it has to be educational content. So you could do something like Sesame Street or, educational programs like that, or on PBS where they're learning something, and that could be a variety of different things that they teach on those kind of programs. If they are looking on a tablet at something, there are some good apps, like there's like ABC Mouse and different learning apps that they could look at there as well, where again they're gathering some skills, and it's not just like a mindless game that's not teaching them anything, or YouTube that may not show them some of those skills that we want them to know. Although on YouTube, there is some good stuff like Miss Rachel that helps with some language skills in some of those younger age groups. So I think it's, just again, looking at watching it to make sure you know what they're watching too, and not just assuming because it looks like it's kid related that it's safe or what you want them to watch.
Yeah, very, very true. Sometimes we feel comfortable and we allow our kids to watch like network channels that we feel they're age appropriate or they're child based, but they may not be age appropriate. There are a lot of Disney channels, shows that are not age appropriate
Mhm.
for children under 6 and Nickelodeon and things like that. So we also have to do our dual legend. Well, I can't even say it. Um, to be super mindful. We also have to be super mindful of what our kids are watching and just tuning in every so often as well, you know. And I think that goes back to making it educational. Oh, tell me what you watched
Yeah.
and so forth. And I will say I'm a strong advocate for Bluey. I love Bluey. I
I,
think it's a powerful show for both kids and parents to enjoy together, and they can learn a lot from it.
yeah, I agree. It's a really good show.
It is. What signs should parents look for to identify if screen time is negatively impacting their child's behavior or well-being?
Yeah, another great question. So I think you kind of touched a little bit on that earlier, where you said there may be some more symptoms or traits, I should say, of like ADHD or autism, and more so of like how the child is acting differently than they would usually. So if they're acting more irritable, especially, I think that's a big one, especially if it's more than like 30 minutes or an hour at a time, you'll notice like they get really upset and emotional if you take them away from that screen time, and, disconnecting from that can be really hard for them. Some kids will be more hyperactive or, just like jittery. You're like, oh my gosh, what happened? You could see that from too much screen time. Again, sleep could be affected. You might see kids get more anxious or just also more withdrawn or show, signs of sadness or depression as well, more than you would expect them to at their age.
Yeah, and I would say I think you would be able to explain this more than me, but when it comes to the mental health portion on how it can negatively impact, we have to talk about dopamine and how those receptors are getting really, really negatively impacted um, by screen time.
Yeah. So essentially, like whenever you watch shows or things that really are giving you that immediate feedback or a good feeling, that's where dopamine's released in your brain. And that is like a burst every time, especially with things like video games. That's another big one we didn't even talk about yet. That gives a lot of bursts of dopamine in your system, which gets to be almost like addicting for kids, especially for those that are ADHD. That can be really hard for them then to get away from that, especially if it's something that they really are enjoying and interested, engaged in, that's really hard to disconnect.
Yeah, and I can touch on that. For better or worse, most individuals with dopamine with ADHD kind of have a more of a lack of dopamine than a neurotypical person would. So when we get those bursts, right, whether it's through a game or screen time or something, it's like whoosh, like a huge high to the brain. So you're always craving it and craving it and craving it and craving it, and it does become, in a sense, an addiction. And when the parents, especially for my teenagers, when parents try to make restriction, it's a fight. The
Absolutely.
kid irritable. It's like roll, 4, 3, 5, 6. It's a huge explosion in the household. Um, and I think moderations can help us get to the point where essentially teens will find other things to also entertain themselves.
Right, right. And I think that's where, like I mentioned earlier, that the family media plan is helpful, where you kind of decide, okay, when do we want to use screen time and when do we not? And what other activities can we do instead of that? And maybe we put do not disturb at certain times, like meal times together and things where you're enjoying each other as a family. So at AAP, so American Academy of Pediatrics, and then healthychildren.org have some good resources for families to look for ideas and even I think a plan on there as well.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. And we'll make sure to put those links as well with this video. So again, can we talk a little bit more on strategies or recommendations that you have for managing screen time in a way that promotes a healthy balance?
Yeah, so again, I think looking at all the different ages and what those general recommendations are, keeping in mind planning ahead. And I know it's not easy. We can't do that every single day of our lives as caregivers, parents, and just adults. It's hard to do that every day. But I think having a common theme and plan every day schedule generally is helpful to say, okay, we know that these parts of the days are extra busy, maybe for us as parents, or, after school, when kids are tired, maybe that's a good time to have some screen time or downtime. And we can do that together as a family. Again, making sure that it's something educational and we have some time to relax together because relaxing is a good thing to do whenever we can, even though sometimes it's hard. And then, again, maybe we play something that's educational, or we have these other times in our schedule we're doing something fun together and setting aside those screens. And again, the sleep schedule, it's cutting it off that hour before bedtime. But I think really being cognizant of like, okay, these are the hours that we have in the day that are left outside of all the other activities we're doing. And that's where we want to really focus in on what we're using that time for and how much screens are involved in that. But I know we can't really beat ourselves up as parents. Like things happen, kids get sick, you have to work. And so maybe those are times where you have to use it a little bit more. And not to like beat yourself up over that because I've done the same thing as a parent. You have those days sometimes, but I think generally trying to be mindful of that is what's most helpful.
Yeah, and I will say the one thing that I know it was hard to implement in my family, but no children is allowed to be in my car with a telephone.
Mm.
Absolutely not, especially in the back seat. Nope. I take all their phones away. They actually hate being in my car. But I take everybody's phone away when they have friends over and we have to go somewhere. I tell them, text your mom or dad, let them know that we're on the way, but I need your phone. And I
Mm.
hold everyone's phone in the front seat. And then the minute we park to our destination, everyone can have their cell phones. But I think it does cause more harm, especially in a moving vehicle,
Mm.
to be face down at all times.
Right.
And I know so many parents do that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to kind of soothe their child, and so forth. But it can have a lot of damage.
Yeah. And I think that's good to point out is that we as the parent or caregiver also have to model what we want our children to do. So like, like you said in the car, obviously you want to make sure you have your phone down because that's a safety concern or, trying to be mindful of how you're using your own screen time because your kids are watching, especially the older kids, they're going to be like, well, you do it, like, right? So we have to do what we want them to do. And it's better for us as well, even though even for us as adults, it's hard.
No, it is. Full disclosure. I've been called out when I'm like at a red light. phone. I can't be on my phone. Yeah, but it's a red light. The car's not moving. So go my way.
Right, yeah, catch that. So,
They're always watching, and I think it's important for us to model good screen time hygiene.
hmm
Very important. Okay, so let's talk about the last question, I swear. How does screen time impact specifically neurodivergent children differently? And are there specific considerations or guidelines for managing their screen times? I feel like the neurodivergent population sometimes can spend a little bit more time on screen time. And I've heard multiple reasons why. Some are valid, some are like, okay. Hmm. Um, but what is your thought on it?
yeah. So I think, it depends on what the neurodivergence is. So, kids that are ADHD alone, I think, we talked about how the dopamine burst, especially for them, can get to be almost addicting in a way because of how significant that is for their biology. But then when we think about kids that are autistic, it might be different, if they're not also ADHD, where, especially I think in those younger kids where they may be in a different way of developing their language. So, like gestalt language processing, or, how we're learning in a different way. Sometimes they pick up on the language from certain shows, and that's how they learn language. It's just different. But I think, again, being mindful of the content that they're watching, that you also know what they're watching, you're trying to engage with them on that as well. But I think for some of those kids, it could be, where some of that might be helpful for them to pick up on those skills because it may be harder for them to learn in the neurotypical way.
Yeah, I think there in the mental health field, you will have some that are a little bit of all over the place as far as like therapy wise. I don't think any therapist that works, even as a neuroaffirming therapist that works with the autistic population, can agree on a specific thing when it comes to screen time. Because
Uh,
you're right, some kids do benefit well. It's easier for them to pick up body language and so forth from a main character in the TV, whereas in real life, we're constantly moving and we're constantly doing things with our faces and other things, and it could just be a little bit confusing. Um, so in those areas, it can be very beneficial. At the same time, we still should limit it to some
mhm.
extent, because so like in-person interaction, one-on-one is, I mean, you can never compete
Yeah,
as far as like the benefits in the long term with
right.
that. It's just it might look different, and I think a lot of the parents feel like their autistic child doesn't know how to play or doesn't play. Actually, autistic kids play. They play very well. It just looks very different. Sometimes could look very internal and repetitive, and that's still play. And
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong with that. But there are many different therapy out there, or therapy orientations or theories that will disagree or will push for something else. Um, I think as it relates to screen time specifically, there still should be limits. I have many autistic children, many autistic teens that I see on a day-to-day basis, and we do limit screen time, and we see a lot of progress when we limit screen time.
Mhm.
But we are adding something extra, right? So we're adding more of that family interaction. We're
Right.
adding more of something.
Mhm.
Um, so it's not like the child is being deprived in
Right.
general,
Right.
any interaction whatsoever. And yeah, and teaching the parents that you can play and you can interact with your child, it's gonna look very different from their siblings.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
like, if you're wrong, it's just different.
it's
And
different,
it's valid. Like, their play is play.
very much so, very much so. Um, so Angelica, is there anything else that we didn't touch that we didn't get to cover?
I don't think so. I think there's just one other website I wanted to share that has some good info for families too. It's called commonsensemedia.org. So again, those three, the American Academy of Pediatrics, so AAP.org, and healthychildren.org. and now this commonsensemedia.org are all good resources for families to get some ideas and just tips, and a lot of the information we talked about is on there.
Yeah, and I will say as a whole, we are seeing our kids are not chronologically like, right? So their actual birthdays and where they are not matching up throughout, not specific to neurodivergent, but in general throughout the lifespan. We're seeing 8-year-old girls making lines at Sephora for makeup. We're seeing a lot of things. So this isn't a topic that impacts just a specific gender, just a specific age group. This is a topic that impacts all genders, all sexual orientations, everybody throughout the lifespan. It's important that we start to limit a little bit on the screen time as far as like screen time hygiene. We need to do more. I know there are laws that are being trying to pass in everybody's state right now. Some are pro, some are against it. We're not here. This is not a video for it or against it. This is an educational video. What you guys decide to do with that information is up to you. All we can do is bring you the information at the end of the day.
Yep.
I hope that we can have more talks on whether it's this subject or any other subject, and hopefully people can reach out to us and let us know what they want us to touch more in the future, and we will do so. Again, I'm Jeymarie. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
All right, Angelica, take care and we'll see each other soon.
Bye.
Bye.